He had been walking for 11 minutes along Osu Oxford Street in Accra on a Thursday morning in April when he saw her, not because she called out to him, not because she moved, because she did not move, and in a street full of motion, hawkers swinging bread loaves on their heads, okadas threading the gaps between trotros, a boy with a phone pressed to each ear, the stillness of a person sitting against a wall at 8:47 a.m., with both hands folded in her lap, and no urgency in her body at all, is the thing that will always catch an eye trained to notice what does not fit. She was very small. She was very old. She was sitting on a flattened cardboard box in the narrow strip of shade between a mobile money kiosk and the edge of a compound wall, and beside her on the cardboard was a cloth the color of dried red earth, folded around something that had weight and shape. She was not holding a cup. She was not holding a sign. She was not looking at anyone. She was looking at the middle distance with the patience of someone who has long since made her peace with waiting. He reached into the pocket of his trousers, produced a single one-CD note, and held it out to her. She looked at the note. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. Then she picked up the note from his fingers, folded it once along a crease that was already there, and held it back out to him. "No, Mama," he said. "It's for you." "I know what it's for," she said. Her voice was low and clear. "I am not hungry." He stood there with his one-CD note in a woman's hand extended back toward him, and he did not know what to do with his face. The note hung in the air between them for 3 seconds, and then he took it, because she had left him no other choice. He thought about her for the rest of that day. He was still thinking about her 6 days later, and that was when he understood that something had happened on Osu Oxford Street that he had not finished understanding yet. What he did not know, what he could not have known from those 11 seconds, was her name, what she was carrying in that folded red cloth, or the reason that giving back his one CD was not a refusal, but an answer to a question he had not known he was asking. Her name was Nana Ama Owusu Boateng. She was 73 years old, and she weighed 51 kilograms, which was 4 kilograms less than she had weighed before the year her husband Kwadwo died, and a further 2 kilograms less than she had weighed at the beginning of this trip to Accra, which had now entered its 11th day. She had come from Kumasi on a bus that cost 42 cedis, carrying one bag and the red cloth, and a purpose that had been consuming her for the better part of 2 years. She had been sleeping on a mat in the corridor of a compound in Abeka, offered by Ifua Asante, who was the cousin of her daughter's friend and who had said, "Come, stay," without asking when she would leave, which was the most generous kind of offer because it did not attach a clock to the kindness. She had grown up in a village outside Kumasi, where the school had 7 benches and 14 shared books, and a teacher who came 4 days out of 5, and on the 5th day the children sat together and read to each other from whatever they had. Nana Ama had been the one who read aloud, not because she was assigned to, because when she read, the other children went quiet and leaned forward without being told to, and she had understood early that there was something in her voice and in the shapes of sentences that could do something to the air inside a room. She had spent 31 years teaching primary school in a village 40 minutes outside Kumasi. Class sizes between 38 and 54 children depending on the season, and whether the farming families needed hands during harvest. She had taught under 4 headmasters, none of whom agreed on very much except that Nana Ama Owusu Boateng's class produced children who could read with comprehension in a district where that was not a guaranteed outcome. In her last year she had taught 51 children with 23 textbooks, which she had managed by developing a system of morning and afternoon groups, so every child had a book in their hand for half of every school day, and she had marked every one of their exercise books herself, every week, in the red pen she bought with her own money from the stationery shop in Kumasi, at 2.50 cedis apiece. She had retired in 2018 with a ceremony in the assembly hall, and a certificate in a cardboard frame, and a plastic bag containing rice and tin sardines from the Parent Association. She had been genuinely grateful for all of it. She did not have a pension. The pension scheme for rural district teachers in her region had collected contributions faithfully through most of the 1990s. Between 2001 and 2003, the money had been there and then it had not, and the explanation had arrived in a letter written in English that used 8 paragraphs to say nothing definite, The kind of administrative language whose purpose is to acknowledge the existence of a problem without accepting any responsibility for its resolution. She had written 2 letters back. She had received no reply to either of them. For 11 years after that, she had told herself the money would be sorted eventually. She had seen other teachers from other districts receive theirs in years that were not the years they were supposed to receive them, and she had decided that patience was the most useful posture. Then her husband died in 2019, and the shape of things changed, because Quadwo's salary from the transport union had been the steady part of how they lived, and without it the weight of being owed a pension by a system that had not yet decided to pay it was no longer an abstraction. It was a calculation she made every month. It was her granddaughter Zuri who had said, "Grandma, they cannot just take it. There must be a record somewhere. Someone must know." Zuri was 19 years old and studying for her WASSCE, and she read the way Nana Amma had read at the same age, naturally, as though the words were already inside her and the page was simply confirming them. Zuri had found a name on a legal aid website, a lawyer named Mr. Asiedu, who took cases pro bono on a rotating basis, once a month, in an office above a pharmacy on Cantonments Road. Zuri had filled in the contact form herself. The appointment had come back for a Tuesday in April, and Nana Amma had taken the bus. Inside the folded red cloth was not money. It was 31 years of paper. Payslips from 1987 onward, each one kept in a separate envelope, and the envelopes bundled by year with rubber bands that she replaced whenever they dried out and cracked. Pension contribution receipts, the 2 letters she had written to the district office, and the recorded delivery slips confirming they had arrived. A handwritten ledger in her own careful script, a school exercise book with a green cover, 48 pages, ruled in blue, in which she had recorded every deduction taken from her salary under the pension scheme from the first month to the last. The date, the amount, the cumulative total, the initials of the payroll officer who had processed it. 31 years of a person insisting in ink that her work had happened and that it counted. She was not hungry on that Thursday morning because Afua had made kenki and fried fish before 7 a.m., and she had eaten well. She was not desperate, she was purposeful. She had an appointment on Cantonments Road at 10:30 a.m., and she was sitting in the shade because it was a 34-minute walk from Afua's compound, and she had left early and arrived with time to rest her feet first, and there was no sense exhausting yourself before a meeting where you needed to be clear. When the man in the good Agbada held out the 1 CD note, she looked at his face and saw not condescension but a man who did not know what else to do with the impulse he was feeling and had reached for the most available thing in his pocket. She did not hold it against him, but she was not hungry, and she was not without dignity, and she had not traveled 332 kilometers and slept 11 nights on a borrowed mat to accept 1 CD from a stranger on a street where she was simply resting. She handed it back because it was the truest response, and she had lived long enough to know that the truest response is usually also the most efficient one. The man took the note. He looked at her for 2 or 3 seconds. He walked on. "If you can already feel what this is, stay with me, because what happened in the 9 days after that is the part that changes everything." His name was Kolade Adeyemi Bright, 58 years old. His logistics and freight company operated out of East Legon with operational offices in Takoradi and Tema, and a fleet of 34 trucks covering the corridor from Accra to the northern border. His name had appeared on the cover of a business magazine the previous November under a headline about infrastructure investment, which is the kind of headline that means the person has stopped being merely successful and has become the sort of successful that other people invoke when making arguments. He had 614 employees. He drove himself to work 3 days a week in a 2019 Land Cruiser with 87,000 kilometers on the dashboard, because his therapist, a calm woman in Lebon who had been telling him the same true things for 6 years, had said that the 22 minutes each way were the only part of his day that belonged entirely to him, and he should protect them. He was not a careless man. He gave to 3 foundations and served on the board of 2 of them, attending the meetings in person rather than lending only his name, which is the distinction that separates involvement from decoration. He had simply, on a Thursday morning on Osu Oxford Street, seen a very small and very old woman sitting on a cardboard box, and done the thing a person does in that situation, reached for money, The fact that she handed it back stayed with him. He could not say exactly why. He had given money to many people over the years, and forgotten the encounters before the day ended. Not from coldness, but from the honest mechanics of a full life. This woman, in 11 seconds, had installed something in him that he could not locate and therefore could not resolve. On the 6th day he went back to Oxford Street. She was not there. The mobile money kiosk operator looked up at him without recognition. He stood for 4 minutes in the spot where she had been sitting when a woman selling groundnuts from a low table at the corner looked at him looking at the wall and said, without him asking, "The grandmother? She's at the lawyer's office. She comes back around noon, every day this week." Her name was Abina. She had been at that corner since 2009, and her face carried the authority of someone with a fixed vantage point in a place full of motion. She had seen more than most people because she had been present consistently. And consistent presence is how you come to know a street the way a street actually is, rather than the way it appears to people passing through. Khaled bought 5 cedis of groundnuts he had no particular appetite for, and said he would come back at noon. He came back at 12 minutes past noon. Nana Amma came around the corner at 12:19 p.m., walking slowly, the red cloth under her arm, and she stopped when she saw him standing at Abina's table. She looked at him. She looked at Abina. Abina looked at the traffic. "You came back," Nana Amma said. "I had a question," he said. "If you don't mind." She considered him with the patience she brought to everything. "Ask. Why did you give it back?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to answer, but the quiet of someone choosing which of several true answers to give. "Because I was not sitting there for money," she said. "I was sitting there to rest my feet before an appointment. You saw one thing and thought you understood the whole situation." She adjusted the red cloth against her side. "I did not want to let you teach yourself the wrong lesson." He had no immediate answer. He stood on Osu Oxford Street at 12:21 p.m., with 4 meetings scheduled after 2 o'clock, and the knowledge that this conversation was more important than any of them, without being able to explain why. "What is in the cloth?" he said. He knew it was not his business. He asked because the way she held it, not clutched, not casual, but held the way a person holds something they have been responsible for across many years, had been one of the details he kept returning to in 6 days of thinking about 11 seconds. She looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she sat down on the low wall at the edge of the compound beside Abina's table, and she opened the red cloth on her knees. He crouched down. The paper inside was old. Not fragile, she had kept it meticulously. The envelopes were sealed and labeled by year. The rubber bands were sound. The ledger's green cover was worn at the corners, but the binding held, and the sheer volume of it made him go still. 31 bundled years. He was a man who read documents as his primary professional language, and he could see at a glance the precision of the organization. Consistent, systematic, unbroken. Every contribution receipt, every payslip. A handwritten running total that matched itself column by column across 48 pages of ruled paper. He looked at the first year in the ledger. He looked at the last. He looked at her face. 31 years, she said. Teaching, I kept every receipt. He straightened. A bus passed behind him on the road. Abena cracked a groundnut. A child somewhere down the street rang a bicycle bell twice for no visible reason. Have you seen the lawyer? He said. 4 times this week. He is a good man. He has found the file number. But the physical file is held in a secondary storage room at the Social Security Division in Ministries. And the division needs a supervisor's sign-off to release it to his office. And the supervisor has been... She paused, selecting the precise word. Unavailable. How long has it been unavailable? Mr. Asiedu says the request was first submitted 14 months ago by a different claimant with a similar case. That claimant gave up. My request was filed 11 days ago. She looked at him steadily. So for me, 11 days. For the file, 14 months. Kolade was quiet. He understood bureaucratic delay in the way that people who move goods across a country for a living understand it. Not as a mystery, but as a system with specific pressure points, specific gatekeepers, and specific languages that unlocked the gates. The supervisor being unavailable was not an obstacle in the sense of something impossible. It was an obstacle in the sense of something that had not yet been approached by someone with the standing to make unavailability inconvenient. "Which supervisor?" he said. She looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because I know people in ministries. Whether they can help I cannot promise. But I would like to know the name." She did not give it immediately. She looked at him the way a woman who has been carrying 31 years of evidence in a red cloth looks at a man who appeared twice on the same street corner. Not with suspicion exactly, but with the precise discernment of someone who has learned that the arrival of a person with the apparent ability to help is not the same as the arrival of help. "What do you want from this?" she said. It was the right question. He thought about the honest answer, which was also the difficult one. "I want to understand why you gave the money back," he said. "I've been thinking about it for 6 days, and I still don't fully understand it. And that does not happen to me very often. I think understanding it properly might require knowing what you were actually carrying." She looked at him for a long time. Behind her, the street moved, and the city moved, and the heat of mid-April pressed down on everything. "I gave it back," she said slowly, "because I came to Accra carrying 31 years of my own work and my own worth. If I had taken one CD from a stranger's hand, I would have become, in that moment, a different story than the one I am. The money was real, but it would have made me smaller than what I was holding." She placed one hand flat on the red cloth. "I did not work for 31 years and keep every receipt for a person to see me as a woman who needs one CD." Kolade Adeyemi Bright stood on Osu Oxford Street and was very still. He had built a company with 614 employees. He had invested in roads and cold storage and the movement of goods across the country. He had given to foundations and sat on boards and written checks for causes that mattered and thought of himself in the specific way that people who do these things think of themselves, as someone who understood what generosity required. And on a Thursday morning he had seen a small, still, very old woman, and his first instinct had been to reach for the smallest denomination in his pocket. She was telling him, without accusation, without performance, in the plainest language available, that the gesture had been a reduction, not of her, of the story she was living. He thought about how many times in 41 years of business he had looked at a situation and offered the most available answer rather than the correct one. He thought about how many files were sitting in secondary storage rooms across this country, waiting for someone with the standing to say, "This needs to move. Today." "Tell me the supervisor's name," he said. "Please." She told him. It took 9 days, not because the problem was technically difficult. In the architecture of bureaucratic delay, the file had been sitting in a secondary storage room at the Social Security Division in Ministries for 14 months, waiting for a supervisor's signature that nobody with the standing to insist had yet insisted on, when a letter arrived from the office of Adeyemi Bright Freight and Logistics. Referencing the exact file number, the supervisor became available within 2 business days. The verification of Nana Ama's contribution ledger against the official records, which matched to within 40 cedis across 31 years. A discrepancy that the official records turned out to have caused took 3 more days. The formal letter of acknowledgement and the schedule for repayment of the outstanding amount, which had accumulated with the interest the scheme required to pay, took 4. The figure in the letter was not what Nana Ama had expected. She had expected the principal. She had not expected the interest calculation, which added 17 years of compounding to what was owed, and which produced a number that she read twice and then set down on the mat beside her, and looked at the wall of Ifua's corridor for a long time, before picking it up and reading it a 3rd time. She did not cry. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs and looked at the number in the letter and breathed carefully, the way you breathe when you are deciding how to carry something very large into the rest of your life. Ifua came through the corridor with a basin of washing and stopped. "Good news?" "My own news," Nana Ama said, and she smiled, which was not a small expression on a face that had held itself level and purposeful for 22 days in a city that was not hers. Kolade came to Osu Oxford Street one more time, on the Friday of that week, not because he needed to, but because he had learned in 58 years that the people who hold the middle of a story together rarely get told how it ends. And Abena had been the middle of this one. Abena received the news the way she received most things, without drama, cracking a groundnut and nodding slightly, as though she had already expected it to come out this way, and was mildly gratified to have the confirmation. "She is a woman who knows what she is worth," Abena said. It was clear from the way she sat. Some people sit like they are asking permission to be there. She sat like she had already paid for the ground. Kaladi bought another 5 cedis of groundnuts. They were very good. He ate them walking back to his car, and he thought about a woman who had kept 31 years of payslips in individual envelopes, with rubber bands replaced whenever they dried out, and a granddaughter who had found a lawyer on a legal aid website and filled in the contact form herself, and how the whole architecture of what was owed had been there, complete, in a red cloth the color of dried earth, on a cardboard box on Oxford Street, waiting for someone to stop looking at the surface and ask what was inside. He thought about the 1 CD note. He thought about what it means to see a person and believe, without evidence, that what they need is whatever is most immediately available in your pocket. Not cruelty, not malice. A failure of imagination, the failure of asking the question you should always ask before you reach for anything. What is this person already carrying? What have they already done? What is the story I'm looking at, and how much of it can I actually see? What Khalad thought he was offering on that Thursday morning was generosity. He was wrong. He was offering the shape of generosity without its substance. A 1 CD note to a woman sitting on cardboard, who was, in fact, not sitting on cardboard, but standing at the end of 31 years of her own careful, documented, unacknowledged labor, waiting for a system that owed her to acknowledge what it owed. She did not need his 1 CD. She needed him to stop walking, and when she handed the note back, she gave him something more useful than any amount of money could have been. She gave him the question, what are you actually seeing? Is it the whole story? And if it isn't, if you have looked at the surface and assumed you know what is underneath, what will you do when you find out you were wrong? Think about a moment in your life when you offered someone the easiest thing you had, and they needed something you hadn't thought to offer. Not money, not a gesture. Something harder. Time, attention, the willingness to sit down on a low wall on a street and ask what was in the red cloth. Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read what you actually remember, not what you wish you had done. Subscribe for more stories about quiet dignity, hidden worth, and the people the world walks past without stopping to ask what they are carrying. I'll see you in the next one.